Welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. I am a dating coach, an energy interventionist, and acupuncturist. Basically, I've spent a lot of my life trying to figure out how to help people have more pleasure, how to feel better, feel good, be present, and live a great life. So I'm really excited that you're here checking out the show. This episode is awesome. I sit down with Dr. Jordana Jacobs. She's a clinical psychologist here in New York. This conversation's awesome. We talk about death, dying, living, meditation, dating, love, the life, the afterlife. We got just about everything in this one. To follow Jordana, Dr. Jacobs, you can find her at Instagram at Dr. Jordana Jacobs, or her website is jordanajacobsphd.com. So be sure to check her out. She's lovely. We had a great talk. And so without further ado, welcome to the show. All right, and we're live. Welcome.
Thanks.
So my guest today is Dr. Jordana Jacobs. You are a clinical psychologist in Midtown Manhattan, and here we are recording in New York. Thank you so much for coming over.
No problem.
I'm so excited to have you here. So one of the things that I wanted, we'll just dive right in.
Sure, yeah, let's go for it.
So I'm really curious about your experience working with like death. Right? You said that was part of your studies when you were getting your doctorate?
Yes.
Tell me all that you know about dying.
So I have worked with some patients that are terminally ill. I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is a cancer hospital, also in Midtown Manhattan. And we did something called meaning-centered psychotherapy, which is based on the work of Viktor Frankl. Do you know Viktor Frankl?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Man's
so
Search
Man's
for Meaning,
Search
right?
for Meaning.
I love that book.
Me too.
I say that to some of my dating clients. I'm like, if this dude could find happiness in a concentration camp, you can handle Tinder.
I mean, that's a really good point. It's a really good point. And I actually do think that the lessons from that book translate across the board, not just for terminally ill cancer patients or people in the Holocaust. I think that the idea of the search for meaning and how we can identify different sources of meaning in our life, and that meaning is pretty much always there, but it's up to us to create it and to identify it, to maintain and sustain it, are lessons that, work across the board. But essentially, I worked on this research study that was looking at meaning-centered psychotherapy based on the work of Viktor Frankl with terminally ill cancer patients at Memorial Sloan Kettering. That's how I started thinking about death and the way in which as we get closer to death, we have an awareness of the preciousness of life and come more in contact with the preciousness of love and more connected to other people. And so then for my dissertation, I decided to study that empirically. So essentially, I primed people for death, which means I brought thoughts of death into their conscious awareness with a couple prompts, because we don't think about death all that often unless we're sick or someone we know is not doing well. It's one of our greatest unconscious fears, if not our greatest unconscious fear. I would argue it's our greatest.
Sure.
It's our greatest. So I brought death awareness into people's consciousness and then measured how they felt about their intimate partnerships. So as it turns out, in my study, at least, when you prime people for death, they actually feel more intimately connected to their long-term partner.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Pretty crazy.
So that's similar to like the exercise. So I met you upstate. We'll just sort of give some context, right? I met you upstate and you led us through an exercise. It was super cool where you like printed out a picture. You took our pictures and you aged them like 30 or 40 years. And then we had like a conversation with ourselves from that perspective.
Right.
Is that the kind of stuff that you were doing with your dissertation?
So with my dissertation, it was just an empirical study. It was just a research study. So now what I'm trying to do, based on that finding and other research that I found that support that finding, I'm trying to create exercises and experiences that help us in a way that feels safe and comfortable and loving and warm, come into contact with our transience and impermanence, so that we can have those moments where we do feel more intimately connected. We do feel more loving. We do feel more passionate. We do feel that preciousness of life.
Nice. I have so many places that I want to go with this. I just had, I had 2 clients earlier today where it was so fascinating because they're also friends. So one of them, her best friend just got married. They were on their honeymoon in Thailand, and the husband died in a rock climbing accident.
Wow.
Been married a week.
That's
And so my client came in and she was just like, full on grief, right? I mean, it's like, it's intense, and appropriately.
Very.
So, it was like this impermanence of life was just so like right in front, and so it got me thinking about like my son and just like, squeezing Jen and, just being so grateful. I mean, for me, the stuff like that just kicks me into such a state of gratitude. And then the woman that came in after her, I saw her for the first time last week, and she has like wicked anxiety. And she was just like, I'm so obsessed with dying. She's like, I'm afraid of dying. It's all I keep thinking about. I'm reading all these books on the afterlife, and it's just like, I'm paralyzed by it. And I was almost at like a loss for words, in the sense that like, for me, when I like one, death just doesn't like, it doesn't frighten me in that way. And if anything, it just encourages me to live more, like to live more fullest. And so I was like, how can I connect with this woman? I was like, well, think about all the TV shows with vampires. I was like, it's because of death that makes shit interesting and like adds that sort of like that motivation. Because, the reason these vampires are so unhappy is because they live forever.
I think there's a tremendous amount of truth to that. I thought about this a lot when I was watching Westworld. Do you watch Westworld?
Yeah.
So the first season, I just could not. I had been so excited about this show. I was like, this is literally everything I've ever wanted in a television show. It's HBO. It's going to be like sexy and violent, which I like do actually like. It takes place in this sort of like alternative future world with, I just was very excited. And then I started to feel like I couldn't connect with any of the characters, and I realized I just didn't care. And I didn't care because nobody died. And anyone that quote unquote died would just be brought back to life. And so there was no meaning to all of the robots' lives because there was no end to them. It was only in the second season, I actually haven't finished it yet, so no spoilers.
Right.
Where now I think they maybe can't die. They can die now. I don't know. Don't say anything.
Sure.
But that did shift things for me.
Right.
So back to what you're saying, yes, being aware that we're going to die does bring a certain amount of preciousness and meaning to our lives. It's sort of a parabola, though. You go to the other side and people are so afraid that they can't get that meaning and that richness that can come when you are more accepting of mortality. There are a number of reasons why people get so afraid and so preoccupied. One of which is that if you do not, there actually have been studies that show that if you are not living life fully, you're more afraid of death. But the more fully you live, the more ready you are to die. So, people say like, I could just die right now. It's because they're in complete bliss and they feel like they're really alive. That's the point where sort of love, death, and life all intersect. They all become one in that moment where I could just die right now.
Yeah.
So if you're not really living and you feel disconnected from life, then you're frequently more afraid of death. Another reason why people are so afraid of death is because they want to control it. So that obsessing and that thought process where you can't really let it go. And actually, a lot of people who think about committing suicide are people that want to control something that is uncontrollable. So something I've thought about, and I recently heard about this, that actually people that are afraid of heights often on some level have this unconscious feeling like they're going to jump. And so their fear is to control that unconscious feeling that they're going to jump. Right?
I feel that way. I was just talking to Jen. We were at the doTERRA convention, and we were like on the top floor of this hotel, and I walk out, and I just like, I've always just thought about jumping. And I was like looking down, I was like, I wonder if I would like land in the bushes, or if I could make it to the fountain. And like, I've been that way since I was a kid.
Do you have a fear of heights, or is it?
The fear, I guess I don't call it a fear, but like, yeah, the concern would be that impulse to jump would take over.
Exactly.
But I don't really get afraid of that. I mean, I don't think about it as a fear of heights. It doesn't stop me from that. But like, that's definitely like the feeling.
Yeah.
And Jen was like, are you suicidal? And I was like, far from it. I was like, it's just this like visualization where I'm like, I'm also kind of curious. Like, what would that be like? You know? And I saw this video of one of these fucking Facebook things where it was this guy survived. He tried to kill himself by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he survived. And he's like one of the few that actually survives, and someone saw and was rescued in time and stuff. And what he said was, he said, you know, for so long I've just wanted to jump off this bridge, and the only thought that I had after I jumped was, I wish I didn't.
Yeah, we become preoccupied and obsessed almost with an impulse. And a lot of the time around death, that's a desire to control something. The ultimate thing that we cannot control, it's a desire to control that. So whether it's obsessing about it, because obsession, it stems from a desire to control typically, and to try to figure something out that you can't figure out. I'm definitely somebody that suffers from that. So on one hand, on one side, it's that obsession, and then you can take it as far as saying, okay, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah. Fuck. It's so sad. I mean, yeah, it's just so sad when that happens. I mean, I was actually thinking about a buddy of mine who killed himself. I don't know, it was probably like it was 10 years ago. And that level of suffering, you know, I think he was bipolar, and I just had no idea. You know, this kid I went to high school with and stuff. And yeah, it's like, it's just so fucking heartbreaking, you know, when people think that that's like the way out.
Yeah. I had a supervisor that said to me once, when thinking about people that want to hurt themselves in that way, you know, what is the question for which suicide is the solution? That's it. What is the question for which suicide is the solution? I think that differs for everybody, but often I think the question is revolving around like an inability to sit with suffering and an inability to have hope that it's going to change. And one of the things that I'm thinking about when I say death and death awareness, at least in my research, is the awareness of impermanence in general, the awareness of transience in general. Everything is going to change. So when you're in that state where you just feel like you can't handle it anymore, the awareness in and of itself that this feeling will arise and pass away, can you hold on to that truth? That often helps a lot of my patients that are struggling, if they can really believe that truth, that every moment's going to arise and pass away, every feeling is going to arise and pass away.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, with everything. I mean, it's like that's one of the things that I just absolutely love about Chinese medicine is that it's like, it's so focused on the moment that's happening, you know? So if you're getting acupuncture and you see your acupuncturist at 9 a.m, you might get a different treatment than if you saw him at 4 p.m. And the treatment can vary based on the seasons as well. You know, that's why we feel the pulse and all that stuff. And it's like, there's just this recognition that like your energy wants to move. and it like by encouraging that movement, things will shift and adjust. And one of the podcasts that I did, like this, my sort of like my ultimate rant is about this whole idea of a chronic disease. I just think anything is bullshit. Not that the suffering isn't happening, not that there aren't symptoms that are arising, but this conjecture and projection into the future that like you will have this forever. It's just like, who the fuck are you to tell me that? Like, and how does that serve the patient? Right? It covers the doctor's ass. But how fucked up is our medical system? I'm getting all fired up. How fucked up is the medical system that like our approach to healing is to just remove hope. We're like, well, we don't want them to hope too much. We want them to hope that they might go into remission or hope that they might be able to manage it. But like, why are we removing the hope of a total disappearance of all of it?
Absolutely. As a psychologist, I think that especially in the beginning, after a first session with a patient, my primary goal actually is to instill a sense of hope that things can change. They will change no matter what, right? That's what we're talking about. They will change no matter what.
Yeah.
And all of these feelings will pass, but without a sense of hope, I think that's when real depression and real anxiety sets in.
There was a study, I saw this study that was, they were looking at where people were happiest in regards to their vacation. And they found that their happiness spiked 2 weeks before they were actually on the vacation.
Oh, that's amazing. But they weren't as happy once they were on the vacation?
Yeah, because you got issues with the passport, the person sitting next to you, all the bullshit, right?
Yeah, it's all about like the anticipation and the hope. That's amazing.
Like,
That's a great study.
I'm not going to feel like myself in 2 weeks. It's going to be better.
Yeah.
And then you're there and you're like, oh, I'm still me.
I don't know if they mentioned this in the study, but it's also the idea of apparently we're really bad at what's called affective forecasting, affective forecasting, so emotional forecasting. We always think that something that's coming up is going to make us feel better, and we always overestimate how much that's going to make us feel better, or we underestimate how much something else is going to make us feel better. We're really poor at assessing that, but I think it's mostly because we're looking to external things to change a self state, which help to a certain extent and maybe temporarily, but real change comes from within.
Totally. Going back to the this thing with the death, reminds me. So this patient that I had this morning, so she was talking about like, she's afraid of death. She's like obsessing about the afterlife and like trying to sort it all out. And somehow I got to this thing of like, well, like, what's your purpose? Like, what are you doing with your life? And she was like, I don't think I have one. And I was like, well, then that's the problem. Like, the problem is not that you're going to die. Like, we're all going to fucking die. Like,
the problem is that you're not living.
Right. And she was just like, oh, and then, and it was just so funny because there I was just like, in my head, I was like, all right, treatment's done. Like, you've been here 10 minutes, but like, that's the thing. Right. And then for the next like 40 minutes, she just kept asking. She was like, am I ever going to get better? Is this ever going to go away? Is it, am I always going to be afraid? Do you think I have OCD? Like, I was like, this is out of my scope of practice. Like, go see Jordana, right?
Yes. I feel great sympathy for her. And it sounds you had an aha moment there with her. I hope she felt it. But then she launched right back into that obsessive loop of trying to figure everything out rather than just sitting with the truth that was just identified.
Totally. And like one of the things that I come back to, and I think it's in Viktor Frankl's stuff too, which is like, what amazes me is how gratitude is like the way out of like suffering.
Yeah.
It's just, and that's what I was telling her. I was just like, listen, I was like, from where I stand, like everything that you give voice to in this room is about like negative stuff. And I was like, if there's anything that's good, you quickly dismiss it. And I was like, so the way out is just to be grateful. Like, make a list of all the shit that you're grateful for. And if you do that for like a week, There's no way you can still be in the same amount of, this is, my sort of like armchair quarterbacking here. Like, there's no way you could still be in that same state of anxiety and afraid of death if you like are like, I love my salt shaker. I love this sweater. I'm so thankful I can take a pain-free breath.
She just has to really mean it and not do it like it's homework that you're doing on a to-do list and checking off, which if you have an obsessive style is likely. So it's really maybe more about getting her out of her head and into her body and starting to really feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
I say this because this is for me.
Yeah,
it's also like something that I definitely struggle with, and I for years and years, I had an ex-boyfriend, and we went to sleep every night listing 3 things we were grateful for. That was in sort of my early 20s, and I've continued doing it, and it's tremendous. Yeah. It's tremendous. It's a beautiful way to fall asleep if you're trying to quiet an anxious mind or a ruminative mind. But I think last night I was grateful for Kate.
Yeah.
I was grateful for Elian, and I was grateful for my mom.
Nice.
But I've been thinking so much about community and support, and yeah, I think it's very helpful to think about how grateful you are. And I do think that the recognition of death of everyone, death of yourself and death of everyone you love. There was some quote that I just heard recently. I think it was an Onion post, actually. It was like, death is maintained at 100%. Like everybody, it's going to happen, people. And so if you think about the people that you love, that you take for granted in your life, that you begin to feel are always going to be there, and start to recognize that they're not, it can definitely cause a lot of anxiety. But I think the work is about tolerating that anxiety so you can move through it and get to a place of tremendous gratitude for the time that you have with them.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like when, patients experiencing grief from like death or even from a breakup, one of the things that I really like to celebrate is like the magnitude of your grief is commensurate with the magnitude of how much you loved, and that's like, there's huge value in that. So like, let's celebrate that you opened.
Absolutely.
And celebrate that you put yourself out there, celebrate that you let somebody in,
Yeah.
And, the more we just can let that energy flow, the better.
So I've always been interested in thinking about death and meaning and love, etc. But the reason I really chose this for my dissertation topic, aside from working at Memorial, was because a relationship ended, and I thought about it a lot as a little death, a death of a former self for me, a death of a relationship. And the only thing that I found comforting actually was recognizing that I was going to have to say goodbye to this person no matter what. And I should have been preparing for that, actually. And that would have helped me cope, I think, with the loss. I mean, the loss was actually my decision, but I still, for some reason, thought he'd be in my life forever. I think we have a tendency to do that with our partners because it makes us feel really safe and really secure when we're doing this terrifying thing of falling in love. And so then we tell ourselves we have them forever. And on some level, I think we're shocked at the loss often. And if we can start telling ourselves and start recognizing that, just like feelings we were talking about, all things arise and pass away, all relationships will arise and pass away, all people in our lives will arise and pass away, we ourselves will arise and pass away, then I think we can cope with, I would hope we could cope with it better when those changes, when those little deaths do occur.
Oh, it's beautiful. There's so much of the, I don't even know, like the work or whatever is like, for me, has been like just letting go. And it's like, especially in trying to like do new stuff and to like, up level your life. That word is fucking overused now, but like, in that process, there is a drastic letting go of old patterns, of old familiarity, of all of that stuff. I mean, my dating clients hear me talk about all the time that like the first thing that has to change is change what's familiar. If you want to attract somebody new, like what you're used to has got to change. And so but that requires like a loosening of the grip, on what it is that we think is reality.
Yeah. I love that term, loosening of the grip, because I've been using it when thinking about like a loosening of the grip to the ego too. I don't know if you've read the Michael Pollan.
Not yet.
How to Change Your Mind, but he talks about psychedelics as a way to loosen the grip of the ego, loosen the grip on the self. And I do think that when we do loosen that grip, we can be less rigid. We do feel like we can do things that are unfamiliar to us and let ourselves exist in a more spontaneous way, which leaves us more open to whatever's coming in.
Yeah. I love that you went there, because when I was in using that phrase, I was immediately thinking about psychedelics. And like, that's one of the first time I ever did it. I was like, it was really scary, right? Because there's that moment when, I think when I did it was mushrooms is the first one. And it was like, there's that moment when they kick in, and it's like, there's that, for me, it felt
My
like
stomach
that.
just dropped.
There's like that feeling of like, for me, the first time it was a bit of like the top of the roller coaster, and then it's like, it's kind of the drop. And that's what like that phrase dropping acid, of like dropping in, where it's like, there's that feeling where it's like, just amazing. And this like, this surrendering, where initially it was like, and I think when people have a bad trip, it's because they're holding on so tightly to their version of reality. And the beauty of doing some psychedelics, and honestly, even some of these edibles, like just marijuana edibles, like there's that moment when it kicks in, and now I've learned to really embrace it, and I just love it, and I'm kind of like, let's see where this goes. But that's been like, it takes that kind of comfort within oneself in the moment, and not being afraid of the uncomfortable moment that most likely will arise at some point.
Yeah. As you're saying it too, it's really a point of that moment where that everything changes and things are all of a sudden not as much in your control, is the moment where you're simultaneously like really living and getting closer to death, because things are out of control. You don't know what's going to happen. You are letting go. You are surrendering. All of the letting go, surrendering, being out of control is the realm of death and death awareness, right? But it's also the realm of really embracing life and what's coming in, rather than just trying to control it all.
I was talking to Andre, and he was like, he said something, I don't remember his exact quote, but it was this idea that like so much of all of this existence is like seeing those fractals when you're like, on a journey, where it's like, just as soon as you think like, oh, it's in focus, I got it. It's like, it goes,
it's gone.
And it's like the next kaleidoscope, and you're just like,
right.
Oh, fuck.
Well, I think that's, first of all, everything Andre says, I just love everything that man says.
Yeah, he's amazing.
But I think what happens in those moments is we start to create some sort of narrative, and we start to talk to ourselves, and we activate that frontal lobe that kicks into gear. And then we can't experience where the psychedelics are trying to get us to go, which is to turn off that default mode and go to a wider network in our brain, right? So the moment we put words to it, the moment we try to create a narrative around our experience, it's gone. And we're right back into a more rigid, less oceanic state.
Yeah, I always come back to the that quote of like, the Tao that can be named is no longer the Tao.
Right. Or Kierkegaard, if you name me, you negate me.
Yeah, that's next level.
They're the same thing. Maybe the Tao is, the Tao's older. It's definitely, it predates Kierkegaard, so.
Yeah, Kierkegaard bringing the negative,
right?
Negate me, taking it personally.
Exactly.
Yeah, the other guy's like, oh, the Tao, its name, it's not the Tao.
Yeah, no
like,
big
you
deal.
negate me. Yeah.
That's They're saying the same thing, which is stop saying anything, just be in it.
Did you see the research? I think it was the New York Times, the New Yorker. Someone had an article on the newest research with psilocybin, and the guy that was looking at psilocybin and putting in the MRI, and they found that like instead of actually activating parts of the brain, it seemed to inhibit.
Did see that.
So if you haven't heard it, it's like, so what I remember is that he says that they're finding that it inhibits the control center of the brain, which basically the control center would be like all of the do this, don't do this, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. Basically all the shit that you learn after like 2.5. And so one of the kind of the theories or the postulations is that doing mushrooms and doing the psilocybin actually puts you back into the state of like a 1-year-old, which I just thought was so cool because that's definitely been my experience. Like when my kid was born, and you see other kids and they just like, they're focusing like on a leaf, or they're like looking at something really intently. And there's that sort of that moment, where it's like, they're just in like this world of senses.
They're present. It's really simple. It's really simple. They're present.
Yeah.
They're not. My dad always says if you have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you're peeing on the present. And I mean, he pees on the present all the time. He's the ultimate present peer. But it really is that simple. I do think that all of these vehicles that we use take us into the present moment. So psychedelics shuts off that frontal lobe or that neocortex that's firing all the time and just brings us to the now, which is a more childlike state. Kids that are are not thinking so much about the past or the future. They are just here and they're just experiencing all of their emotions as they arise and as they pass away, right? And it's the same thing with Vipassana meditation, at least for me, or other forms of meditation. It's really all about experiencing everything that's going on in this moment.
Yeah. So I'd love if you could talk about your experience with Vipassana.
Sure. I actually am about to sign up for another one. So that will be my third. At first I was like, I can't do this again. But the moment I started like thinking about it, I was like, I have to do this again. I have to do this again.
Well, what led you to do it the first time?
My brother had done it. I had heard about it maybe for about 5 years before I decided to do it. When I first heard about it, I thought to myself, there is no way I could ever do this. I thought anyone that did it was a little crazy. And my brother, who is a very deep thinker and very curious about the mind and existentialism in general, was brave enough to go. And he went while I went to my first burn.
Nice.
He did it at 29 Palms in the desert in Joshua Tree. So he was in the desert in complete silence for 10 days. And I was in the desert with complete stimulus overload. So it's a very interesting experience for us to be, and we're very close. He's 2 years younger than me.
And your dad is peeing in the present.
And my dad's peeing in the present. And my brother and I are like, we got to figure this out. That's exactly right. So yeah, we were both on total opposite ends of the spectrum. Me at the burn, overstimulated. Gideon, with no stimulation. It's actually analogous, I think, to different forms of Buddhism. So like Mahayana Buddhism, it's really like just about you and going internally, versus Tantric Buddhism, which is really about exploring and sensuality and using stimulus as a vehicle to enlightenment, versus Mahayana, which is really about nothing and using nothingness and that emptiness to get there. So really, I felt like we were having, I think we should like write an article about this or something. We were having these very different experiences but trying to get to the same place, I think. And so he did it. It was transformative for him. I also had another very good friend somebody that I was dating at the time do Vipassana, who's a psychologist, and he said that it completely transformed the way he was with patients. And I was working at Bellevue in the psychiatric emergency room and feeling extraordinarily overwhelmed.
Wow.
It was the most challenging work experience I've ever had. And I wasn't even there for that long. I did that rotation for 4 months, but it was very overwhelming for me in the beginning. And
sure.
And yeah, and I felt like I couldn't really be present for people that were coming in because I had my own anxieties and my own fears being in the emergency room. And I wanted to be as good of a therapist as I could be. And personally, I felt I wanted to really work and take that plunge. So I decided to go. That was 2 years ago. And I went to California. And very challenging, very challenging experience. But as a psychologist, especially, I think it can be huge for many people. I don't think it's the vehicle for everyone. Just like I said, I think for some people, Burning Man is really the right vehicle for them. I think for some people, psychedelics is really the right vehicle. It depends. For some people, rock climbing is the right vehicle.
Sure.
And I think the process of sitting with yourself and observing the nature of your mind for 10 days, recognizing that all of the thoughts and feelings that are coming up are coming from you. So taking responsibility for those thoughts and feelings is one. And you recognize that because nothing is happening externally. You have a very regimented lifestyle. You're living like a monk. I forgot. Have you done it? No? You're living like a monk. So you're waking up at 4 every day. You're meditating 10 to 12 hours a day. You eat, basically very similar food, 3 meals a day. If you're an old student, if you come back, you're only eating in the morning. You can't eat after 11:30. And so you start to realize that anything that comes up for you, it's not anyone else's fault. It's all your fault, which means that it's a hard realization, but then it also means that it's in your control, which is a profound realization.
Sure.
And, something that came up for my brother is the recognition that we all have a torturer inside of us.
Yeah.
So he did this during his experience. We've gone now together twice, and we're going to go for this third time.
Cool.
It will be his 4th Vipassana, my third. And so being able to name a thought as it arises as a torturer almost. And so to de-identify with that thought as not you and you just being awareness is a really profound experience, or was for me. And I recognize even as I say this, that these were all things I intellectually understood. Yeah. Reading The Untethered Soul.
Sure.
I studied abroad in northern India. I'd always been really interested in Buddhism and always been really interested in meditation. Always didn't want to pee on the present. Always knew that was key. But it was a fundamentally different experience. And I had meditated before. Fundamentally different experience to really immerse myself in this monk life. And to see what my mind was capable of and the self state I was able to get to when I was truly aware and truly equanimous. And it was the best I've ever been with patients. I came back and the presence I was able to experience and embody and use to connect and really feel for other people, it's the best work I've done. So it's one of the reasons I want to keep going back, and I want to keep working to get to that place in my daily life.
Nice.
And one of the key tenets of Vipassana, because it's just Buddhism, it's just straight Buddhism as the Buddha taught it 2,500 years ago, is the lesson of impermanence. And so I think that's key, and that's why I keep coming back to this whole death thing.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about also was how Vipassana changed your relationship to physical pain.
Yeah. So that's huge. So that is...
Because you've had some chronic pain, right?
I have, yeah. I've had chronic pain in my hip, and I've had it on and off for years since I was 21, and I'm 31 now. So yeah, 10 years. And it's actually, when you asked why I went, I didn't say it because the pain was one of the reasons I didn't want to go.
Sure.
I was so afraid to sit for that long in pain and not be distracted. That's one of the reasons I think it took me 5 years to decide to go. I was like, I can't do this. When I'm in a lot of pain, I cannot sit with it. Absolutely not. And so that was a real challenge, and learning to watch my pain, to detach from it to a certain extent, to view it as something that I initially thought was so stable, because for a long time it didn't change. It didn't change. Through being at Vipassana, it actually did start to change, but it had felt really rigid and stuck until I began to observe it and sit with it and not run from it, not hide from it, not run from it, not distract from it, not wish it away. And when I really welcomed it in, instead of that aversion that we have to pain, emotional and physical pain, but when I really said, here it is. Okay, hi, there you are.
Yeah.
I've been expecting you.
Yeah.
And then I could sit with it, and then I could notice, I'm even doing it right now, I could notice how it does actually change and it moves. And then I'm reminded that nothing is permanent. And then there's a certain letting go that comes with that, instead of the aversion, which we think is a pushing away, but it's actually an attachment. It's just attachment by another name, another form. And it's actually been the only thing that's helped my chronic pain.
Wow.
Yeah. And I saw so many doctors. It's the only thing that's really helped.
Just the sitting with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sitting with it in a very specific way. I had sat, in my mind, I thought I had sat with it. I thought I had sat with it for years and years, but it was sitting with it with a very specific mentality and practicing.
Yeah. Wow.
Because you can't escape.
Yeah.
And Vipassana, you can't just get up, or you can't watch TV. You can't.
Yeah.
You have to face it.
Wow. I'm just feeling as you're speaking. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thanks.
It reminds me of my first year of practice in my acupuncture practice. I was working in this hospital system, and I was seeing patients that were like really sick. It was all outpatient, but they were sick. And I had this one woman who was just extraordinary. This client, she had fibromyalgia and Sjogren's, and she would get these episodes of pain that were like debilitating, and this is one of the, I don't know where it came from, the sort of the advice. I channeled it because I was like 26. Like, what the fuck did I know, But she would talk, she described her experience with pain and like trying to control it, and like holding on. And these episodes would last. You would feel the sort of like the precursor of the onset, and then they would last for like 3 or 4 days of just excruciating pain. And I, or whatever it was, suggested to her, like, what if you didn't try to control it? What if you just like rode the wave? And she looked at me mortified. She was like, I would be afraid it would get worse. I was like, well, you're already telling me you're at like a 12 out of 10. Like, what have you got to lose,
Right.
And to her credit, she worked it, she really worked on like approaching her pain differently. And she would still get the flare-ups, but they would only last for like an hour or two instead of days.
Yeah.
But that, like, embracing that kind of impermanence is just like, it's so tremendous. And I think that like two of the ways that Western medicine or like in science that we just don't understand, that is kind of like, they're so fundamental to human nature, and the fact that we like just don't understand it at all is like kind of amazing, One is sleep, like what the fuck actually happens when we sleep, and two is pain. You know, and this the experience of pain, and you know, healers will talk about like the pain body and like all this shit, you know, and some doctors will be like, oh, you've got a herniated disc, you know, but it's like, well, these fucking 100 people also have herniated discs and they have no pain, you know, and then it's like, well, it's because you're eating this, and it's like, well, these people eat that and there's no thing, you know. And I don't know, I just think that it's fascinating, but like using it as an opportunity to, I think that pain serves in many ways as a call to come back home to your body.
Yes.
And when we spend so much time trying to fight that and push it away and fend it off instead of having this invitation, I think that's where, you know, people get in these loops. I
totally agree. And if you had talked to me, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been very resistant to that sort of idea, despite the fact that I'm a psychologist and I've always known that the mind really influences the body. And I would have been the first one to say, like, see the best specialist on the Upper East or West Side, you know. It's like actually hilarious. If you scroll through my phone and you go to like DR, you can just like scroll for like, and friends know that I know like all the doctors in New York City. So I'm a great referral source for that. And I don't see doctors really anymore, because I've come to... That's not entirely true. I mean, I think it's important to see doctors, but I have had so many experiences in the last few years where chronic issues are resolved psychologically.
Yeah, for sure. Are you familiar with Dr. Sarno's work?
Yes. So Healing Back Pain was a big book for me. It didn't actually help me after I read it. There's some people that report spontaneous healing after reading that book, and that didn't happen for me. I think that it's such an intellectual process to read a book typically, that the things that have helped me are the things that help me shut down that intellectual process and go deeper to other areas of the brain, like the limbic system, something that is much more associated with unconscious emotions. Yeah.
And you need time. I mean, there's a certain amount of time. It's like decanting, you know, it's like you have to let the pain sort of decant a little bit and to experience that. And I haven't done Vipassana, but I've done some Native American ceremonies where, you know, Vision Quest and stuff, where you're out there for 3-4 days, no food, no water. And, you know, those experiences for me have been transformative. You know, when I used to be really sick, like it was that experience out there one of those years that like everything started to finally shift, you know, but it's like I had to give myself this time and space to just let it sort of like decant.
Yeah, decant. And there are real biological sources of pain, of course, and sometimes even for chronic pain. But there's tension and inflammation, I believe, in different parts of our body that are probably correlated with some unconscious feeling or experience. I think in Sarno's book, maybe it was his, or there's somebody else. Oh, I can't remember her name, but she wrote the book You Can Heal Yourself. Do you know who that is? She maps out how different emotional experiences are correlated with pain in different parts of the body. And I do feel like on some unconscious level, given whatever we're going through, that when we don't look at that emotional process, it manifests in the body as tension and inflammation, which causes chronic pain.
Right. Totally. Like my whole thing with the part of the thing with the chronic stuff is that like, it's like your body is generating the same signal over and over and over again. So like, there's no such thing as like a static, like inflammatory cycle. Like your body is taking the food and the water and the air, and it's recreating this inflammation over and over and over again. And the beauty of that sort of like recreative cycle is you can disrupt it.
Right.
You know, let's do different stimulus. Let's carry ourselves differently. Let's move the chi this way. Let's, you know, think this way. Let's meditate this way. But one of the things that I've come to sort of think about in my own life is that like, if something's not going well, especially if the physical body's not feeling well, like everything has to be on the table for reevaluation. And in my experience with clients is like, if there's like something where they're like, oh no, that's fine, I don't need to look at that. It's like, okay, that's where
That's
the
ding,
first
ding,
place
ding.
to start. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Including like faith, including like what's your relationship to faith or to God or to the mystery, It's like,
Yeah.
I found when I was really sick, like I was harboring wicked like anger and resentment at this sort of like invisible force, and I was like
Absolutely.
19 and shitting blood all day. And I was like, why is this happening
God.
to me? And it was like, I was like, I just want to be a normal college kid, and that just like deepened this kind of like resentment. And it wasn't until I was on a vision quest that I finally was just like not trapped, but where you're kind of enclosed in this like space, and it's like the size of this room. And it's like, okay,
gotta face it.
fucking wall of mirrors, I mean, it's
face
just
it.
trees and stuff, but it's
No, absolutely.
and it was in that moment when I was just like, oh my God, I am fucking angry at a lot of things.
Did it heal you?
It was the stepping stone. It's like, it's what I recognize as like
The thing that put you on a different path.
Totally.
I feel the same about Vipassana. Like I didn't come out of Vipassana being like, I'm pain free,
Right.
but I realized that there was a different way to relate to my pain, and it began the slow process of letting go of it.
Mm-hmm.
Really, my mind started letting go of it so that my body could also start letting go of it.
Nice.
And I still cope with it, but it doesn't dominate my life. It used to dominate my life.
I think that's so powerful. That to me is such a tremendous, it's just such a tremendous hallmark of like a good life. Is like not when the hard shit disappears, not when the pain just magically disappears. That's great. And like, let's be grateful for that. But when the resistance can arise and, we can sit with it.
Yeah.
And not freak out.
Right.
Or freak out for just a brief moment.
Right. Well, it's also the Buddhist concept between, pain is inevitable, but the suffering is not. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's also very Viktor Frankl, actually, to tie it back. He was able to cope with a tremendous amount of pain, but there were points where he could find true meaning in his experience of the pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the core tenets is how to for him is how to suffer gracefully, and that there's meaning actually in the suffering. I think this is a semantic argument. For Buddhists, there's a difference between pain and suffering. I think for Viktor Frankl, more in the West, it's how you're going to suffer, but can you make meaning out of that? Mm-hmm. And either way you look at it, I think what's being said is that unpleasantness is going to come. Mm-hmm.
Right.
That is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
But how can we use it to grow, to transform, and to not let it overwhelm us?
So what kind of advice would you give to somebody who might have like chronic pain?
I would have the utmost compassion for them. Mm-hmm. It's really challenging. It's been the greatest challenge of my life, no question. So that first and foremost. And I think for me, what was key was the recognition, but I had to really feel it. And, me saying it right now is not going to change anything for anybody, but I had to really feel that my aversion to my pain was a form of attachment to it. That when we really do follow these Buddhist principles, any sort of craving or aversion is an attachment. And it's an attachment to that which is not now. It's attachment to reality that doesn't exist rather than reality as it is. So it pulls us out of our bodies. And if we can start to really accept and embrace reality as it is and just be with that, then we let go of actually the aversion to the pain, which is the attachment to the pain, which really keeps it going and keeps it alive.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And when we sit with reality as it is, sort of like you said, I don't remember how you said it, but you recognize that things are always changing and you are in control actually, and you can intercept it, and things can be different. And when you're in that, this is a Dan Siegel thing. I don't know if you know Dan Siegel at all, but he talks about the plane of possibility. And that is reality as it is. When we construct all of these sort of mountains that are predetermined, we say this is what's happening, then we don't get to exist in this. He draws a 3-dimensional plane of just possibility, anything, and that's what really exists when we're in reality as it is. And so for the chronic pain patient, we've constructed a very tall mountain, and we don't see that we can be at the bottom of that mountain and that anything is really possible, that we can wipe that mountain off the map. We think if we just get over that mountain that we're going to be okay. We just have to like keep searching for the cure, keep searching.
Right.
But the mountain, when you're searching beyond what is, just keeps growing. And often for me, it made my pain worse.
Sure.
Everything I did made my pain worse.
Yeah.
So it was very
It just
frustrating.
like keeps feeding it. Like that's the
if
problem
you're going to 8 appointments a week to manage your chronic pain, then I think those neurotransmitters in your brain and that the neuroplasticity and those neural pathways become more solidified rather than actually breaking down and there being new pathways that can be formed, new ways of thinking about it.
Yeah, especially because you're like, what are you giving voice to? Like you're giving voice in those appointments to what's not working, what's not well. And then the fact that you're taking the time out to go to those appointments reinforces that, it's like, I got tired of going to doctors for the same reason.
Yeah.
Just like you get this momentum of like, oh, I'm not well. If I was well, I wouldn't have these appointments.
Right.
And then it's just like, phoom, phoom, phoom. And I know, like for me, when I blew a disc in my back and I had this like horrible pain in my foot, my kid was like, he was like 1.5 years, maybe he's almost 2. And like my marriage was falling apart. I mean, it was like at a real sort of like tipping point, But I'd seen this chiropractor that I think fucked me up, and I was doing like these hard work. There's a lot of convergence, right? As tends to be there. And the pain was excruciating. I mean, I laid on my floor for 5 days. I needed help getting to the bathroom. My buddy's a specialist in this. He's like, you got to walk around your couch. I was like, dude, I can't even make it 3 steps, And as I was laying there, it was Christmas time. And I was laying there, and I remember just being so afraid that like my son would grow up with a dad who had chronic back pain, who would have to like lay on the floor. And like, I was just like, oh my God, like what have I done?
It's so
and it's
scary.
like in the moment there was pain.
Right. That's the mountain, but that's the mountain that you've built rather than playing in that plane of possibility of anything could happen.
Totally.
Our fear and our anxiety. Yeah. I too was like, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life, and I'm not going to be able to really enjoy myself ever. I'm going to be trapped in this body, and I'm never going to be able to experience life in a way that feels free.
Yeah.
And that was a tremendous mountain that I had built. And rather than just saying, this is the way it is right now, and being open to that change, but it's terrifying. I feel for you in that moment.
It was
so
crazy.
Scary.
It's crazy. And it reminded me of like, I remember this one woman, this client I had who had migraines. And like the pain was bad enough, right? She had the aura, the fucking stabbing through the eye, like all that stuff. But then the added, she had all of this shame and guilt, right? She had the story that she wasn't a good mother because she had to be in a dark room. She couldn't pick her kids up from school, and like all of that other stuff. And it was just like, you could just like see like, the mountain, or like, here's an extra brick to carry. Here's an extra brick to carry. Here's an extra brick to carry. And it's so hard to heal from all of that.
Right.
And having these practices or this commitment to just being like, okay, right now it feels like I'm getting my eye stabbed with an ice pick.
So I hear about this. I hear about it all the time because my mom suffers from migraines. So my dad pees in the present. My mom suffers from migraines, and I try really hard to help her be in that space of, and remind her that she's had migraines before, and that they pass, and that they don't last forever, and that she will be okay again, and to sit with it now. But I think, we're so afraid of pain, so bad at sitting with it.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about the monks that self-immolate and can just sit there while their entire bodies are on fire, or the monks that can be on the Tibetan tundra and take off their most of their clothes, even though it's freezing, but have the ability to change their body temperature. And they're just in general, the capacity of the mind when it's trained to sit with discomfort or pain and actually change the body. So I think it's just a practice.
Yeah.
But it's also important to remember that we're doing it emotionally too. It's really easy to point to physically. Somebody has a migraine, get that. I want this to stop. I want this to stop. I can't stand this. But we're doing it with our emotions, which I think in turn are affecting our bodies. So we're feeling like bad or empty or sad or lonely, and we're running from that just as much.
Yeah, but that's even easier, right? Because you can just like pull out your phone, start scrolling.
Right. You don't need a doctor or an acupuncturist for that.
Right. Yeah, it's just like, oh,
I'll just distract myself from this pain. It doesn't go away like that.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of the things that I keep thinking about as you're talking is like, so these Native American ceremonies that I've done, like in the Vision Quest, let's say, you're out there like in the woods or on a fucking hilltop or whatever. And typically no food, no water is how I've done it. There's lots of variations. Some places in like Brazil, I know they bring in some psychedelics and stuff too. I never did it that way. And they would have us line up 4 bowls of what we called spirit food, which would be like a water, corn, berries, and meat. And now I had like some crazy sort of experiences when I was younger of like seeing spirits. So I thought that like the spirit food, like I was actually going to be seeing spirits. So I was sitting there and I was like expecting like my grandfather to show up and like, fucking sit down and have a conversation with me.
Wow.
So I was like on high alert for this. And then of course it fucking never happened. Right. And then it wasn't until way later that like it was explained to me or I realized or whatever that the spirit food is like for those parts of ourselves that we're struggling with. It's like for the loneliness or the jealousy or the pain. And it's there, like the easier way to think about it is like a cup of tea, where it's like, oh, hey, friend.
That's right.
Hey, longtime companion. So maybe not a friend. Like, have a cup of tea.
That's my favorite way of thinking about it, actually.
Yeah.
So Ram Dass says that through all of his work, all of his meditation, all of his psychedelic use, all of his travels, everything, he hasn't gotten rid of a single neuroses. He's just learned to call them all schmooze, he says, and to invite them in for tea.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So he invites all of his neuroses in for tea.
Perfect.
And I try to do that too. So I actually, when I'm meditating, I have an imaginary tea table on like sort of the upper left-hand quadrant of my mind. And there are definitely some people that come in constantly while I'm meditating or some thoughts that come in constantly. And I take them in my mind and I bring them to the tea table. I say, you can sit here. Yeah. You can be here. Yeah. But I'm going to get back to what I was doing.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. That's great. I didn't know that Ram Dass said that. That's amazing. It's such a beautiful practice, and part of what I love about that is that like in that kind of construct, you're the host or the hostess. Right. So it's your party. It's your show.
Totally.
And like, are there uninvited guests? Sure. But you're ready for them, and like the tea is always ready. Like the hot water is always available.
I love that.
So it's like, yeah, come on in. Oh yeah.
Your party.
There's some other people in the other room. I'm over here, but like you'll have plenty of company and I'm going to come in and join you at some point. Maybe the first year of Vipassana, like the first couple of years of the meditations that I did, I spent a lot of time in that room.
Yeah.
Trying to like show them the exit and like all that shit. And now I like to think that I'm just like, oh yeah, there's a fucking party going on there. Like I like this room better, so I'm going to hang out here. But they're all in there. Right.
But the very act of creating the tea table means that, like you said, it's your party.
Right.
When you don't have the tea table, your thoughts are in control of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's your thoughts party.
Right. Or they're like trying to like, what's interesting is I just love the Native American stuff that I've done. Like, so that you put up these like prayer ties around like the space, and so it's like, ideally you're making them all year. And so they're like full of my prayers. Right. But in that kind of experience, especially in the outdoors, like when some of these thoughts would come, it felt initially they'd be like, hey, let's leave this sacred space. Like, come with me out here. And that the social or the physical construct of like, no, the party happens here. Here's the food inside of like the prayer space. And like, so this is like where this conversation is going to happen, as opposed to like, you know, letting them take the lead and be like, we're going way the fuck over here into this rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, also, that reminds me of just the idea of thinking about those thoughts or those feelings that are quote unquote disruptive as our greatest teachers, you know? So like being like, oh, like, thank you for arriving. I'm so grateful for you because you represent the opportunity for me to learn how to put you at a tea table.
Yeah.
You represent that opportunity for me to learn about the nature of my mind and how to bring myself back to awareness. So it's expressing gratitude for those things.
Yeah. I think that's so fucking cool. The more and more that I practice gratitude, the more I'm amazed at like
How
the
it
physiological
changes your life.
shift. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So this is just reminding me of the fact that my second Vipassana, I sat next to a woman who ended up having a deviated septum. And you don't change seats at Vipassana. So I had 10 days next to this woman who was breathing like, I mean, I can't even do it. But I went to the teacher about it. I was going to the teacher almost every day saying, does she know that I didn't know she had a deviated septum. I thought she was just breathing really loudly.
She's all in it.
So disruptive. And day 4, I nearly lost my mind.
Yeah.
I was crying. There were just tears rolling down my cheeks. Because I was like, I can't sit with this anymore. Because it's very challenging to be internal and listen and feel your own breath when you have the soundtrack of somebody else's breath that's not in tune with yours really loudly in your right ear. But I broke through at some point, I think day 5, when I started to express gratitude towards her. And I realized that she was actually the greatest Vipassana teacher I had ever had, and that we're always going to have things that are so disruptive to our internal state. And how can we continue to listen to ourselves and be present even in those times? And so it felt like the greatest victory when I was able to hear her, and I would invite her in for tea. I'd say, Susan Pincus, come on in. Here you are. Nice. And I expressed this to her afterwards. Day 10, you're able to talk. I went up to her and I said, Susan, you are the best Vipassana teacher I've ever had. And we had a very long talk about it. She had felt so badly that everyone could hear her breathing. And I had said, it was really challenging in the beginning, but ultimately I learned so much from you. So thank you. And I took her little place card, because you have something that says your name by your seat at Vipassana, and it's on my fridge now.
Nice.
So it says Susan Pincus on my fridge.
Hello, Susan. Yeah. I love that. It reminds me of this one time I was at a Vision Quest camp, and there was this one kid who wanted to go out on a Vision Quest, and he was the person kind of running things was suggested that he go out for like 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. And this guy was like, no, I'm going to do 4 days, and like,
God.
Part of it is like, it's like make a commitment and stick to your commitment. Right. So we put him out, and I'm sitting by the fire with my buddy late that first night, and this kid comes back. He left his area, right, which you're not supposed to do, and he comes back.
And it's like a small area for Vision Quest.
Yeah,
I've heard a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. And the way I did it, you'd be maybe this like the size of this room, so like 10 by 10 maybe. And that's kind of where you're supposed to just sort of be for a few days.
Do you have a tent? Do you have food?
You can do it however you want.
Okay.
I mean, there's some people who bring a tent, some people will bring food. There's lots of ways to do it.
Okay.
Some people go with like the full setup of like mosquito nets and the whole thing.
Are you meditating, or you're just experiencing where you are?
Yeah. So there's not, at least the way I did it. Yeah. The way I did it, there wasn't like a formal, it wasn't anything like a suggested sort of meditation practice. It's just kind of
that
like.
Sounds really hard, actually.
Yeah. Because it's just like, you're just sort of like thrown into it, and like ideally people are preparing for like a year ahead of time, and they're sitting in sweat lodges and hopefully getting some kind of like instruction along the way.
How long did you do this for?
I've done a few of them, over the years. And this particular one, this guy, he comes back in the middle of the night. And this guy had like a lot of issues, right? There's a lot of shit in his life. And he was like, oh man, I can't do it. Like the mosquitoes are terrible. I'm getting bit all over the place. These mosquitoes are terrible. And I watched as like the people sort of running the show were like talking to him about how the mosquitoes, like what happens in a vision quest is like your life, and so like the mosquitoes are not really like, the things. It's like each bite is like something in your life. It was beautiful how they like did the whole thing, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Seeing how I handle this. And then the guy was just like, no, man, it's the fucking mosquitoes.
Yeah, he's just not
wasn't
there.
it,
Just not there.
And I love, like, I'm so appreciative of that. I was really judgmental earlier about it, but like I love that now because it's like,
yeah,
like one perspective, it's like, yeah, this is your life, and another perspective, it's like, no, man, I got fucking bites all over.
Both are true.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful, beautiful ceremonies. The other, God, there's just so many things that have popped into my head. One of the things that I had this experience with that ties in both of what we've been talking about was when I was finishing acupuncture school, I was in this, I did this clinical rotation. We had just gotten access to Children's Hospital in San Diego. And there were 2 departments that wanted us. One was the oncology department. And then the other one was this, like, they were starting this new chronic pain department for kids. And they were like right next to each other.
Wow.
In the hospital. And it was amazing because for so many reasons. But the thing that struck me the most, and that was kind of the hardest to deal with as a young practitioner, was the kids in the oncology department, many of them with terminal cancers. They would be either quarantined in a room, so you had to scrub up and the whole thing, or you'd see like the ones that are a little bit healthier that were like walking through with like the IVs and their chemo drips and just like cruising around. And they had this radiance about them that was just like, I mean, it was almost Buddha-like. I don't want to over glorify it because it's heartbreaking, but it was like they had a shine that was like not chemo. It's just this fucking thing in their soul, right?
Yeah.
And it was almost like this sort of embracing of the impermanence. And then we'd go to the chronic pain, and it was like,
this is fascinating.
Fucking brats.
Jim.
It was brats. It was like, and I'm not proud that I was like shitting on it, but it was like the contrast was just so stark to me as a 24 or 5-year-old, where, I mean, it was just like every kid that had this like chronic pain, where sometimes it was like, do you really have like a chronic hamstring pain, or are you just upset because you can't run as fast as like your friends? It's like all the exams are showing nothing, but like you're having this pain. You don't want to diminish the pain, and I get that. But I was like, the treatment that needs to happen right now is we got to take this kid from the chronic pain department, walk him through those doors, and just be like, look around.
Yeah.
What can you be grateful for?
Yeah. No, that's such a powerful dichotomy.
It was crazy. I was totally unexpected. I was just like, whoa, this is like stirring a lot. I mean, it's been 15 years and I'm still like,
Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about this one for a while too. My initial thought is that, yes, of course, the kids in the cancer unit or the oncology unit are experiencing that preciousness of life, but there's also probably a lot of letting go and a lot of just being where you are, versus the kids in the chronic pain unit. A lot of the chronic pain comes from, I think, this like obsessiveness and this attachment and this not letting go, this like holding on, this attachment.
And like focus on where they're not, right? Like we talk about like, my
not
kid won't have a dad who's healthy, or like, yeah.
And it is this sort of letting go and being where you are that allows you to experience life, and I think makes you look, even from the outside, like vibrant.
Yeah. Have you been with people as they've passed, or like in the day or two before they died?
So people in general, yes.
Yeah, actually, like at the hospital and with your work and stuff.
So with my work, I have been around people relatively close to death. I haven't been in the room with anyone as they passed away. But for a period of time, the people I worked with had stage 4 cancer, and they did pass away. So yes, but very recently, my 106-year-old grandfather actually just passed away. And that was a week and a half ago, and I saw him a few days before he died. And it's, I feel the humanity as a therapist working with a patient. No matter what, there's a humanity there. They're not just my patient, but it is a different thing when it's a family member. There are boundaries that I do feel like I have to maintain as a therapist, no matter what.
Sure.
And to really allow myself to feel the grief of losing somebody in my family was an interesting experience, because I haven't lost anybody in my family in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Not since I think I started studying this so heavily. So to be like, oh, this is different, to really feel it rather than just talk about it.
Yeah. Do you think there's an afterlife?
Such a good question. I think I'm pretty agnostic about what comes after death. I think it is like the great unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I try to sit with is not knowing the answer to that, and feeling like it is the great mystery of life. And can I just sit with not knowing? Can I tolerate that?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to create something that I think for me would be to just make me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Not to judge anyone else's thoughts about that, but I think for me, that's what it would be about. But I have started to feel that I don't believe in an afterlife per se, but what if there's something I could get closer to believing in, it's in this sort of collective unconscious, and in this, I wouldn't even use the word collective unconscious. I would use the word like loving awareness that exists between all things and in all things. And that when we pass away, we return to that oceanic state of loving awareness. Somebody once said to me, it was my uncle actually, said, E equals MC squared, but the most important part of that equation is that E equals M. So energy equals matter, which means that matter equals energy.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that was once energy can become matter, and anything that was once matter, so people, then become energy.
Mm-hmm.
That I can get down with.
Yeah.
That I can get down with.
Yeah.
But the idea,
the great recycling.
Yeah, but the idea of an afterlife or reincarnation, as it's spoken about in Buddhism, which actually was not created. The idea of reincarnation was not from the Buddha himself. It was an idea. This is also something that Andre taught me, but it's an idea that was adopted by Buddhism as a religion later, rather than it being something that the Buddha actually said.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's interesting too.
Sure.
Do we have this need to feel like we know what's coming, and that we are going to live, a piece of us is going to live on, and that is more of a creation of culture and of our need as human beings, and our fear of death, rather than from the source himself.
Yeah. So in your research, in your work, if people felt a greater sense of peace approaching dying, was it because they resolved an idea of what happens when they die? Or is it that they achieved a greater state of joy, compassion, appreciation, equanimity about how they lived?
I don't know if I can fully answer that.
Yeah.
My gut is telling me that it's more the latter than the former, that it had less to do with certainty later and more to do with, and maybe even if it did have to do with some certainty later, it's only because that informed the quality of their life now.
Yeah.
So I guess it's both.
Yeah.
Right? But that is really I think the quality of the life they're living now that made it easier for them to feel like they could go.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of stuff, right?
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
What's funny is that right now in my head, like just sort of letting that sort of like mystery sort of percolate. And then I know you and I also appreciate the show Big Mouth. So I also have like the hormone monster, like, and this whole conversation like playing in my head.
I love that show. It's
Yeah,
so
death,
funny.
death, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Do you believe in the afterlife?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And I'm, I'm okay with that. I there's energetic sort of like tendrils or impressions that remain. And, how does it remain? Like, I don't know. Like if I see somebody and I feel their, a dead relative show up or something, is it that the relative like has actually shown up, or is it some kind of energy connection, and like, is it this person's sort of like soul and energy that's existing here that's now manifesting in this other form that I see it in order to get a message to do it, but it's just sort of like your energy that's taken another shape of something that's passed, and it's like some sort of impression. You know what I mean? It's like, there's all these sort of like things, or it's like, same thing if I see like a spirit animal around somebody or something. It's like, do I really believe that a fucking like bald eagle has showed up like in the room? Or is it your consciousness or something took the shape of that because it means something to me that then I'm going to get a message to you?
Right.
I think it's much more stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I had this experience with a client who, the first time I saw her, I felt her mom. I don't even remember this. This is what she told me. I felt her mom, and I had all these sort of messages for her, but I have a vague memory of that. And I was working with, her name was Melissa. I was working with Missy, and Missy ended up getting cancer. So she was so afraid of turning into her mom that she got like a very similar cancer of her mom. I mean, that's not a causation, but it's an interesting kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Missy ended up passing away. I was with her like a day before she died, and it was beautiful to be a part. It's just I've been able to be close with several people who have passed, and the fact that they've wanted me near them near the end is like something that I really cherish and am grateful for that opportunity. But I was also treating Missy's best friend. And so after Missy passed away, her friend came, and I kind of expected to like feel something, but I didn't. And a couple of times she came in, I didn't feel anything, and I was like, well, I guess Missy's not coming through. And like, I don't know how this shit works, And then this one time her friend was coming in, and about 10 minutes before that appointment started, I had another guy in the room, and I was treating him, and I was sitting out in my waiting room, and I went to go get the needles out. And then when I opened the door, this dude's laying on the table, and the energy in the room was totally different to me. The lighting was different. It felt like I was like, if you could like walk sideways into a pool, where you're just like already like 8 feet deep, like that's what it felt like. I opened the door, and I'm like walking into this wall of water. And I was like, whoa, like, what the fuck, right? And in the corner of the room, there was like this light that was coming down. And, it's not like the patient would have seen the light, but it was like, in my sort of perception, everything was different.
Right.
And I pulled the needles from this guy, and as he goes to check out, he was like, dude, I feel great. And I was thinking, yeah, I bet you do, right? So I go in, I change the sheet, and I see like Missy, like this sort of like version of her, and she's like, I'm here for my friend tonight, and I was like, oh, okay, shit's gonna get fucking weird.
Wow.
And so, it's a tricky spot for me because like, what the fuck? I don't know. I'm like a fucking maybe part-time sort of intuitive sometimes, right? And so I was like, all right, like, listen, I'm not going to just be like, hey, Missy's here, And so it's like kind of shitty, it's kind of shitty to do that. It's a strange
position for you to be in.
And so I was like, all right, Missy, I was like, you're going to have to like.
Did you say this out loud?
It's like it's like a telepathic kind of thing.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, you're going to have to like, you got to give me a sign or something that's like of the significance for the two of you. And I swear to God, I see this stuffed pink elephant, like it's crystal clear, right? And that doesn't normally happen for me. It's like, really, it's just like, whoa, that's something. So the client comes in, and I'm like already like, I'm just like revving, right? It's like if I'd had like a fucking Red Bull. And the patient's talking, and I was like, I wonder if she's going to pick up on like the room being different, but she's like,
Is
talking
Missy
about
there?
whatever. I'm feeling Missy there. Like the whole, like, it's like some version of Missy, but it's like, there's a lot of people. It's like the best way I can describe it is like, it felt to me like the room was really crowded, super crowded.
It's so interesting. I know.
And so I'm sitting, and like behind me, I feel is like an amphitheater full of energy. And I'm waiting for like this client to like recognize something, but she's in her own stuff and she's grieving, right? I mean, fuck, it's been a few months,
Yeah.
And so I say to her finally, I was just like, because she's heard my stories and stuff, so I didn't give much of a preamble, but I was just like, hey, do elephants mean anything to you? She was like, no. And then she's like, well, my grandmother loved elephants. And I was like, yeah. And then her energy changed. And she goes, actually, Missy and I went to India and we rode elephants together. I was like, okay, we're getting closer.
Uh-huh.
And then she starts crying. And then she says, and when we were at the airport,
Oh, God.
I bought us each a pink stuffed elephant. And when I gave it to her, I said, this is so that we can always be together. And then I'm crying now. And I was crying in the room.
Unreal.
And I was just like,
Unreal.
there's a fucking, that's like, she's here,
Yeah.
And it was like, it was beautiful. Right. And so then she like lays down on the treatment table, and it was cool for me because like Missy's like telling me what to do, so she's like, point here, do this, put your hands here, do this. And I'm like doing this shit, and I'm fucking crying. She's crying. It's just beautiful. And then Missy and like all of these other things that I'm seeing in the room look at me, and they're like, all right, now you got to get the fuck out. I was like, huh? They're like, we got to do some stuff. You need to leave. And I was like, shit.
Uh-huh.
And it looked like they unzipped her body. Like if you, like it just an unzipper, like a sleeping bag. It's just like, and as I'm like leaving, I'm kind of like looking, and it's just like her whole energy field is just like splayed open.
Wow.
And I was like, what the fuck? So then I go and I'm just sitting out there waiting, until I feel called to go back in.
How long ago was this?
Year and a half, maybe 2 years, year and a half.
Go on.
And yeah. So then I go back in, and what do you do there, right? And it's just like, fuck, So I like pull the needles, and I tell her like, how they told me to leave and what I was seeing, and Missy was explaining like what they did is like reprogramming her energy and like just moving shit, and it was like she had this like it was just stuff, right? And I'm like floating now. I'm just like, I'm so fucking like grateful. And the patient leaves, and she's not like as revved as I am. I was like, fuck, how is she not like, whoo,
Yeah.
But she was in it. And so then, and this patient she'd had so much grief. She'd lost like 2 or 3 other people in her life, like in the last year. Another friend of hers was really sick, and it was a lot for her. And so then I get a text from her the next morning, and she said, I got home. She goes, I don't know how I made it home. She goes, I got home and I sobbed for hours. She goes, I haven't had an expression of grief like that in ever. And she said, and then what you had told me finally happened. She goes, I finally felt at peace in my life. Yeah, it's just like, fuck. Like,
What a powerful,
it's amazing, right?
powerful experience for everyone involved. I mean, I'm just wondering like how you say you don't believe in an afterlife, if that's been your experience of really seeing people or energy manifest in this way.
Yeah. Right. I know. But I don't, and it's also like, I just don't know. I mean, I could sit here and tell you, 10 other stories sort of like that. That's a really beautiful one. But, and the truth is I just don't know, it's like, was that really like Missy? Was that the thing? Or was that this person's like waking consciousness that like somehow took that shape and created that experience and created that amphitheater for that kind of healing, because that's what she needed. And if it was like pulling in this kind of energy, you know,
Right.
it's
Is
like,
it something that you two created or that you were picking up on intuitively from her rather than really something outside of the room coming in?
right. Right.
Still, I don't know.
I don't know either. And that's like the thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Sure. We don't know. But if something like that ever happened to me, you don't believe until you experience really. I mean, well, some people believe and have faith in that regard. But once you experience something like that, wow, that's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. But like today, for instance, so this client, right, this guy just died like yesterday or 2 days ago. And, you know, I felt his energy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? I didn't know what to do with that. Where it was like, was I feeling it because like she wanted so desperately for that energy to be there? You know, it wasn't like the Missy thing, but I didn't know this guy. But there was definitely like a couple of messages, you know, where he was, but it wasn't like a message of verification, you know, but it was just like,
There's
listen,
no
like,
pink elephant.
Right. It's like, but you know, he says he wants you to do this and that and like whatever.
Did it resonate for her?
For sure. But I also didn't want to feed into it. So I wasn't going to say shit, but she asked, she's like, is he here? And I was just like, well, what do you think? You know? And I was like, I saw him like in the corner, you know, and I was like, well, look over there, you know, see what you see.
Did she see anything? No.
She started crying, you know. But was that because she desperately wanted that energy, or was it there? And so, like, as like a practitioner or whatever, like my whole thing has been like, only show me shit that's relevant. Like, I don't need to see a bunch of like superfluous stuff, you know. But yeah, I don't know. But also, if people come in looking for that, like it's never worked, you know, because it's like I don't know if I have to be relaxed or like it feels more authentic to me if it arises instead of me searching for it. And if I've had a client where I felt like I had to search for it, I just don't like that. It's like I'm not a fucking. This isn't like a party trick for me. It's just
right.
Like,
it just
but
happens.
Sometimes it happens, and you know, it's like it's happened with Shonda actually.
Really,
we were at dinner. I was drunk. We were drinking all day, and I went to the bathroom one night at the bar. It was downstairs, and fucking her grandfather showed up.
That's so strange.
And he started giving me these messages, and like he was like, "You got to tell her this and this and this and like all this shit, right?"
Wow.
And I was like, "Dude, I'm just trying to take a leak here. Like, what the fuck, you know?" And so then I go back upstairs where Shonda is, and Jen's there, and some other friends were there, and you know, I wasn't gonna just drop this on her. I was just like, "Hey, sometimes like I was like, I don't know if you know this about me. Sometimes I see things and like." I think I have something for you, you know, and
that is so wild.
And she was like, what, you know? And so I started telling her this stuff, and it was like, he was there and I was talking and whatever. I think it really helped shift some things because he was talking about like love, you know, and like attraction and stuff. And I think it helped shift some stuff for her. And Jen was just funny. She was like, well, this is what it's like when you get drinks with Jim.
I mean, it's pretty amazing.
I don't, you know, it's fun. It's fun. Sometimes it's fun. You know, it's cool to see like the things.
Yeah, it's good that you're not scared of it anymore.
Right.
So I remember you saying it was pretty
When
scary
I was
as a
younger, for
kid.
Sure. Right. But I wonder what it's like for like true like mediums, you know, who like feel the energy, like possess them or like walk in, like where they see it all the time. Like I don't see it all the time. Like that's got to be a whole other thing.
Yeah, there are very few psychologists actually that study this, but if you want to learn about one, there's a woman at Columbia named Lisa Miller who actually does study, I think she calls it like the paranormal.
Sure.
And was once on a television show that looked and examined children who can see and feel energy of people that have passed away.
Yeah.
And there are very few people with PhDs that are psychologists that are willing to really look at that sort of phenomenon and explore it.
Cool.
But, you know, it's a very interesting thing because in our current biomedical paradigm, you know, of the DSM-5, we don't allow room for people that have experiences with that which other people cannot see without calling it psychosis. And I
Did
think
you just
we
call
need
me
to.
psychotic?
No, we need to have more experiences with
Right.
with people and have other ways of talking about it and thinking about it, because according to the DSM, anyone that sees anything that isn't there
Yeah.
they're having a hallucination.
Interesting.
It's something that's not real, that's coming
Wow.
from their own brain.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is that the idea, there isn't really room, there's very little room for people to have hallucinations that aren't hallucinations, quote unquote.
Yeah.
That would be assuming that what you're seeing is not real, first of all. So the idea that people can have hallucinations but not have a psychotic illness doesn't really exist either.
Wow.
And there's a whole set of symptoms that come along with psychosis, like a really disorganized mind in general, and inability to complete tasks or to really take care of yourself. So it's an odd thing, psychologically speaking or psychiatrically speaking, to see anybody, a child, an adult, anybody that has experiences with things that other people cannot see, who are organized and can live their lives and aren't decompensating. We don't have space for that in the DSM. That doesn't exist.
Wow.
Yeah.
It seems to me, at least one of the things that I value is like something that's verifiable, right? So like the pink elephant thing is like perfect,
Right.
Because it's like
It's amazing.
verifiable.
It's amazing.
And it would seem that in the DSM, when they reevaluate that shit, like
Right.
let's save some space for the people that can get some verified
That
shit.
can get that are proving it. No, it's incredible. It's incredible. And I think my experiences in the last few years I've never had an experience like that, but just in touching realms of existence that feel like there's more to life than that which I can see typically, leaves me feeling very open to that as an experience. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah.
In at least my field. But hopefully we can change that.
Did you see the story of the kid who kept having nightmares about World War II?
No.
There's a story of this little kid was having dreams. He was like 5, right? Or 4 or 5. He was having all these dreams of World War II. And he was like making these pictures that were like really graphic and like planes getting shot down and all this shit. But he had all these names. He was able to like name like
oh my
his
gosh.
sister and like people that he was with and like the name of the ship that he was on and like
Terrifying.
all of this stuff. And he ended up like the family started doing research, and the guy has like a sister who's still alive. So he gets this like 90-year-old sister on the phone with like their 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old or maybe the kid was like 7, I don't know. And he was asking her about
My
shit.
jaw is dropping.
Yeah.
If anyone's listening still.
He was asking her about shit that only she would have known, like only that they would have known. Like, do you still have the paintings that mom drew of us in the attic, And it was like, it was crazy. And so then like the story was that the Japanese government like found out about this, and they flew this guy, because it was like the battle was like over Japan, where I guess this plane was shot down or something.
Yeah.
And so I heard about the story maybe 10 years ago, I think. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
And then so the kid flies out of these, like the Japanese government hosts his family out there. They tour the site where his plane was shot down, because the kid had all this information. And after like that whole kind of like ceremony, the dream stopped and like the kid felt normal again.
Wow.
Crazy, right?
Can you send me this YouTube video?
I'll find it. Yeah. It's a wild story.
Man. Yeah, I love things like that. I don't know what to do with them in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know
Me
where
neither.
to put them. Yeah. I don't know where to put them, and I believe them. I believe that is the experience that this little boy had, and to sort of think about what that's about is fascinating to me.
Yes. All right. On that note, let's wrap this puppy up. It's been so great having you here. How do people get to find you? Where do they get to be your patient and connect with you and all that stuff?
So I have a website. It's www.jordanajacobsphd.com. or you can email me at Dr. Jordana Jacobs at gmail.com.
And Instagram, do you have a work-friendly Instagram?
At Dr. Jordana Jacobs.
Great.
Yeah.
Simple. Look at you, consistent with your branding.
Trying to be consistent here, make it as simple as possible for people.
Amazing. Well, thank you so very much for being here.
No
This
problem,
was fantastic.
Jim. This was lovely. What a great chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for listening, and we'll check you next time.